Our scripture reading today comes from John chapter 15, verses 1 through 8. Hear the word of the Lord. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. If you remain in me, and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
When I was growing up, my grandpa owned a garden, landscaping, and real estate company in Chicago. It was a rite of passage to work there for a season in my family. Sometimes you'd shovel snow or drive a plow or work at the shop. For 2 summers in college, I got gardening. Most of it was watering and trimming plants and bushes, but one site had a patio area that had a trellis and pergola set up around it. And the people there wanted to grow a vine on that trellis. Minding that vine was the most time-consuming part of my job. In order for it to grow on the trellis properly, it had to be placed, picked up, and arranged. Once I took a week off to go on vacation, and I came back and it was totally growing off the trellis, sticking to walls, tables, the brick pavers. It took forever to gently pry it up and place it where it was supposed to grow. During the summer, it also grew fast and flowers bloomed beautifully. All I had to do was keep it on track and it could keep multiplying on its own. Then the fall came around and I went back to classes and softball and left the garden alone. I stopped by over the winter and was greeted by what looked like a collection of brown sticks. I was so disappointed. There was so much time and effort that I put into that vine the previous summer. I wasn't looking forward to disentangling it all and starting from scratch when spring rolled around. I wasn't even sure that it was worth the effort and time that it would take. Today's text uses the imagery of God as a gardener, Jesus as the vine, and his disciples as the branches of the vine. But in talking with people at High Rock, many of you don't feel like branches of a vine that have been carefully arranged on a trellis. You don't feel like summer blossoms growing with purpose. I've heard lots of people feel more like those brown stick branches, stiff, stuck, no blossoms or fruit in sight. And I don't blame you. The world around us feels more like a cruel, unforgiving winter than a life-giving summer. It's confusing and overwhelming. I feel like since the pandemic, the news cycle has been full of events and stories that highlight the severe impact of sin in our world. War, genocide, mass starvation, systemic poverty, and racism. The number of life-altering actions that have taken place so far in 2025 is staggering. It's hard to keep track of all of them, much less figure out how to respond to them. A friend of mine is a native New Englander. She said that the hardest part of the last few years has been feeling like there's nothing she can do to change anything. She's been so used to being able to endure hardship and still be able to make things better in her world. That's sort of a point of pride for us, isn't it? We're strong, resilient, smart enough to make change. Don't mess with us unless you want to find out the hard way. But now she's got no hope that that's even possible. The scale of pain is too much to do anything about. In the middle of a long, dark winter with no spring in sight, it doesn't matter what you do. You can't change the weather. In those times, the words of Jesus can be daunting. He is the vine and we are the branches. If we're truly connected to him, we'll bear fruit. And if we aren't, we'll wither away. But how can we thrive and produce fruit when we're stuck in a cold winter? And what would Jesus know about it? Do they even have sub-zero temperatures in Galilee? I found out yes, but It's not just from being from a different climate than Jesus for us. No, actually, the disciples would have felt this dissonance too. They've experienced plenty of what feels like futility. They've spent the last 3 years traveling with Jesus. They've seen him perform miracles that have given people full life. Literally, they've heard him say that he is the resurrection and the life, and then bring Lazarus back from the dead. And yet, most people continue to reject him and deny that he's the Son of God. It's only about to get worse. Jesus and the disciples will see even more opposition. Jesus just arrived in Jerusalem and was welcomed as a king, but for them, that meant that the kind of king who would come would overthrow a government, start a political revolution against the Romans. Now, to be fair, some of the disciples wanted that too. But Jesus rejects their image of what a king should be, instead looking ridiculous, riding a baby donkey. Then, instead of taking his rightful place at the head of the feast table, Jesus bends to wash the disciples' feet. The disciples are waiting for Jesus to turn this around, so they ignore his grim warnings, assuming that he's speaking figuratively. But he's not. And actually, what they think is bad news is meant to be an encouragement that they can hold on to when their world will go dark and cold in a day's time. So perhaps, if you are feeling like you can't see hope, this text can be an encouragement for you too, something for you to hold on to in the darkness, even as you wait for spring. The first thing that Jesus invites us to remember is that God is the one who tends the garden. One of the reasons so many of us feel helpless in moments of winter is that we feel like we should be the ones to arrange things on a trellis, to optimize growth or orchestrate a specific kind of growth, or to work towards a fruit we want to see. I resonate with that. I was raised to be responsible and proactive, to see problems as opportunities, to set goals and have dreams, to work, learn, think, buy, invest, whatever, to make progress forward. And in many cases, somehow, things have worked out according to that pathway. Somehow, I've made things work out the way I thought they should. Even when I experienced setbacks or failures, they weren't permanent ones. I'd bounce back. I'd work harder, longer, say the right things, attain the outcome I thought was best. And at High Rock, many of you are far better at this than I've been. Our community has an absurdly high number of people who have been able to work, think, learn, invest, buy, or attain our way towards a better life, or a life that we at least desire. In effect, we've been the ones who've built the trellis, who've placed the vines as we thought best, who've pruned and harvested the fruit at its peak. Many times, we've even experienced discipleship, spiritual fruit, or even spiritual leadership and ministry like this too. We've encountered sin in the world, or seen needs in others, or we've had a vision to help someone grow. And we've been able to think, work, invest, buy, learn, and attain our way out of or through or past it. And we even begin to equate specific kinds of fruitfulness with someone's faithfulness. But in speaking for myself, sometimes it's hard for me to distinguish the places where I'm doing things as a faithful response to God, or when I'm acting or reacting out of fear. That's why we can struggle when we come up against circumstances we cannot change. As I've shared many times before, Brad and I got pregnant very early in our marriage. Surprise! We weren't expecting this, but we were young. We were capable. We could double down and be okay with the trellis that we had built. And then came the second surprise that blew up that trellis entirely. Our son Brady was diagnosed at birth with Down syndrome. There wasn't anything I could do to work or think my way around it. So honestly, I thought that I came to terms with that diagnosis pretty quickly. See, I cognitively understood that I couldn't control it. But looking back, I underestimated just how disruptive this would be to the trellis that I've built and the fruit that I'd started to count on. My whole life, I've been told to work, learn, and attain. And by God's grace, I was able to make progress. But with Brady as our son, I was exposed constantly to voices that devalued him or assumed less for him because he was disabled. The rampant use of dehumanizing language, the justification of excluding them or treating them like second-class citizens. This trellis of hard work and faithfulness that I'd lived on, they wouldn't let Brady grow on that trellis. Brady's Down syndrome didn't confuse me or grieve me, but the sin that marginalized him did. I didn't understand how or why people would choose to do this to him. And to try and make sense of this sin, I reached for control. I ended up learning to be the one to speak up or challenge our family or friends or folks in our church. I urged them to notice the ways that they read the Bible, preached the Bible, the ways that they voted, the ways that they planned things were not consistent with loving Brady or other disabled people like him. I stand by my convictions that I held then. And I think that some people were able to see important truths and grow because of these hard interactions. But I don't think that that was because of how I held myself in that season. Even if I had the best intentions, the way I saw others as the enemy or as projects to fix, the way that I spoke to them, it was not actually consistent with the trellis that Jesus describes, the life that he wants for me or Brady, or the life that he calls us to. And while ministries did change sometimes, and sometimes people thanked me for what I said, I was growing less like a vine and more like a weed. I was responding less to God and becoming more the gardener myself, creating a trellis based upon fear. My actions contributed to the death of some previously dear relationships instead of new life. It's comforting to me that I'm not the only one who's like this. In our text, the Apostle Peter, the one on whom the church is later built, does much the same. Right as Jesus is arrested, the disciples probably felt like a deep, dark winter had fallen upon them unexpectedly. They were cold, lost, and above all, afraid. We see Peter trying to control what he can, and probably thinking it was a faithful response, a fruitful response. He chops off the ear of a servant of the arresting soldier. Jesus rebukes Peter for cutting off the ear of the servant. Peter's violence against the servant wasn't helping Peter or that servant trust God more. To see that the life that Jesus offered was more than the life of sin the soldier was currently living. And of course, Peter wanted them to see this too, to relent from their action. But in his moment of confusion, Peter wanted to force him to see it by cutting them down. Just like Peter, I thought I was being faithful, trying to bear good fruit. I couldn't see that what I was trying to do was control something that wasn't mine to control in the first place. We cannot control other people. We can't change them. All my behavior and Peter's were doing was to make it harder for them to hear how Jesus invited them into a different life free of sin. Jesus takes a different posture. He knows he's in this position because it's where God has placed him, so that more people would come to believe that life with God is the only way to experience life without pain and confusion. Who is he to fight this placement on the trellis by the gardener? Jesus knows he's the vine and that whatever the gardener does is meant to bring life. It's only by faith that God will work this out. And even though it's incredibly painful and confusing, it is for good. And that is why Jesus is able to submit. I think it's harder for us to see those moments in our lives today because unlike Jesus, none of us know the mind of God. We can't know why things are happening the way that they are right now or how they'll work out in our lifetime. We can only trust that God is God, and we don't have to be. Sometimes when I'm in the middle of a painful or confusing winter season, and someone says that to me, God is in charge, it feels so pithy and dismissive. Sure, that's true. And also, I want to know, how does that change my life now? Does leaving the control to God mean that I just have to wait till I'm dead to experience real life? Or will I just be withering on the vine for my whole life? That's why the second thing that Jesus invites us to hold on to is so important. That he is the vine, the source of life. There are so many ways that we can notice God in the world. All of creation bears witness to who God is. The mountains, the trees, the fields, and the flowers. The Bible tells the story of God's love and relationship to the world. But only Jesus is God, made flesh, full of truth and grace. The incarnation of God in the person of Jesus matters in our seasons of winter. It tells us that God values our bodies and our lived experience on earth. Jesus got tired and hungry. He knew life as a child, a teenager, and an adult, and all of the variables that come with each of those life stages. He grieved and knew fear. His body knew limits and disability. I imagine that if God wanted to come be among us without any of those limits, he could have done so. But this embodiment was intentional, so that when we feel alone in our grief, in our confusion, when we reach for control of things that we just cannot, we find solidarity with Christ. Hebrews tells us that we do not have a high priest who's unable to empathize with us in our weakness, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. As a source of life, the vine, Christ's life and relationship to God is one that we can connect to and draw from, so that we too can find grace in our time of need. So how did Jesus live both life with human limits and no full life relying on God? I think it's helpful to know what Jesus didn't do to answer that question. Jesus didn't spend time trying to move himself on the trellis. He was present to the people and the work that God had placed in front of him in that moment. He was aware of what he was responsible for, and he took action. He didn't chase more than that. Jesus took time with the people in his path that others ignored. The children, the disabled, the women, the poor. He wasn't so busy rushing or reacting to what was going on over there, so he could pay attention to what was right in front of him. It's not to say that Jesus didn't care or that we don't live in a different time. We're all aware of how much more interconnected we all are globally. The violence and the pain of our brothers and sisters in Sudan, in Kenya, and Gaza, it should break our hearts. Regardless of our political beliefs, the loss of life in those countries right now is tragic. I've changed where and how I spend my money to support efforts helping those folks. That's who I find myself caring about, which might be different than where your heart goes. We're all different parts connected to the same vine. If you care about something else, care about it. Extend yourself, sacrifice for it, lay down your life for it. But living like Jesus means that we accept that we all have limits and that God wants to use us where we are placed. And God has placed me here. God has placed you here. Some of you might be called to do more than changing your spending and voting habits. But for all of us, living like Jesus means paying attention to what's going on right outside our front doors. Our family lives in Waltham, and we intentionally chose to live in a neighborhood with a lot of immigrants. The fear and confusion around deportations is palpable in our neighborhood right now. I can't stop ICE or reform immigration policies or stop the drug trade that creates so much of the crime that forces folks to flee north. But I made it a priority to get to know my neighbors and to make sure that they know they can come to our house if they need a place to feel safe. And when one of our neighbors was picked up and deported, I sat on the porch and I cried and prayed with his wife after she put her son on the school bus with mine. I cannot bring him back. I can let her know that she's not alone. Staying connected to Jesus, to the vine, helps us remain focused on where God has placed me and how God invites me to respond. What do you spend your time doing when things are confusing or overwhelming? Are you trying to place yourself on a new trellis, operating outside of your limits? Or are you being present to the people and circumstances around you? May we be like Jesus, our God who put on flesh and was present to who and what was in front of him and responded redemptively. What does it mean to respond redemptively? That might be the hardest thing for us to discern in a world that's overwhelming and confusing. I think that Jesus uses this imagery of the vine and the branches intentionally when he's talking to the disciples. They would have been familiar with this agrarian image. The Old Testament is very concerned about people bearing fruit by responding redemptively to God. For too long, God's people, us included, have been mistaken about what the fruit is that God desires from us. We've tried to please God by producing power, by producing judgment, by producing correct outcomes. But that's not what God's goal is as the gardener. God's goal is that the branches produce love. And so the last thing that we have to remember in this confusing winter season is that we are the branches, and that all the branches need to do is bear fruit, the fruit of love. God's love for the world motivates everything. The world might reject God's love, but it doesn't change or negate God's love. As the gardener, God places the vine, and the branches draw their strength, their energy from the vine. If they stay connected to the vine, they will be able to bear the sort of fruit that the gardener intended. Jesus tells us how the fruit of love shows up and makes it clear that the sort of love the disciples are used to isn't it. In chapter 13, Jesus washes the disciples' feet, and Peter refuses this at first. There's a clear hierarchy here, right? Jesus is the teacher and these are his students, his subjects. But Jesus acts as their servant instead. He does something that only the lowliest of servants might do. While Jesus names the distinction that has existed between them, he goes on to say that they ought to do the same thing that he's done for them to those who are in a lower position. And then he takes it a step further. He calls them friends. Friendship in that time was only possible between people of equal social status because a slave couldn't actually be your friend. The master would be paying for their loyalty. Jesus outranks everyone. He's the Son of God, and he still shows love and extends friendship to his disciples. This sort of loving relationship was unheard of. The world doesn't know how to love this way. Think of the relational wounds that you've sustained or perhaps caused. The times where your relationship was transactional, even in parenting or marriage. It was really only there because it was mutually beneficial. Or the times when you had to measure up to a certain set of standards to be worthy of love, and it would just get taken away as quickly as it was laid down. Even if we don't have master and slave dynamics present in the U.S. in explicit ways today, we definitely have hierarchies that we fall into. Places where we think or feel or act like we're better than other people. Ways we treat them as disposable or disgusting. When we're hurt or confused, the easiest thing to do is to close ranks and dehumanize the people we see causing harm. To try and bear fruit without dealing with them. Perhaps we imagine the pruning to be the pruning away of the people that we just don't like or think are causing problems. That's what I was doing in the beginning of our life with Brady, even if it was unintentional. And some of those wounds have not recovered. Jesus implies that sin interferes with the fruit bearing because it saps away the strength of the relationship between him and us, between the vine and the branches. This is what causes withering. Broken relationships are the thing that cause the branches to become ineffective. Broken relationships between us and Jesus, and then us and others. These broken relationships prevent us from loving each other in the mutual sacrificial way that Jesus modeled. Perhaps this is why this moment in time feels so confusing and overwhelming. Our relationship and reliance on God has been waning. And more than ever, we feel the fractures in our relationships with each other. Both as individuals and as a collective body, we have stopped bearing the fruit of loving relationships. In this light, Jesus' words about cutting and pruning aren't actually as scary. They're just identifying and confronting the sin. They're cutting to the heart of our relational problem. They clarify for us why we are in this darkness this winter season. The only way to move forward from that is to draw more fully on the love that the vine offers so that we might truly bear the fruit of love in our relationships with others. Even when I was trying to prune away people, some friends and family took time to offer me grace and love that I wasn't leading with. They saw that I was actually just hurting, that I was confused, and they offered me curiosity. They listened humbly, and they apologized for the way that their ignorance had caused harm before. I apologized for how my fear and anger had dehumanized them. It did end up changing the way that some of them voted and spent their money. And it definitely has strengthened our relationships. They drew from the true vine, and they offered that love to me. Their sacrificial love helped heal my wounds. The second summer that I went back to the garden and saw what looked like dead sticks, I was so bummed out, till I learned more about vines. It turns out that those particular vines have a dormant season of about 4 months. When that happens, the sap pulls back from the branches and into the vine. It's conserving energy. During that time, the leaves drop and growth stops, and that's when pruning happens. If it's done properly, when spring comes, the sap rushes from the vine to the places where the pruning was done, and the new buds appear. New fruit is born. The dormant season is required for new life. During this time, the branch can rest, and the gardener can prune away what's preventing growth. If you're feeling like this is a winter season for you, you might not be withering. You might just be a dormant branch. You might need to rest. When we try to force growth during our winter seasons, we don't have the space to see what is getting in the way of love. We do too much. We end up producing fruit born out of fear or hate. But there is enough of that in this world, church. We have something more to offer. So allow God to prune the things away from your life that are preventing you from being in loving relationships that can bear fruit. Know that by resting and conserving your energy, you are being prepared for a fruitful season later. For some of you, that might mean taking a step back from the things you've said yes to that God did not call you to. You need to let God put you back on the trellis. For some of you, that might mean taking a step back from relationships where you aren't able to love unconditionally, to allow God to heal the wounded parts in you before you can try again. For some of you, you might need to confess where you have been bearing bad fruit, hate, malice, fear, arrogance, greed. Let God prune those things away and start drawing from the vine towards love. I don't know what it is for you, but I do know that we all need this reminder from Jesus today, that you have been chosen by the God who put on flesh. You have been appointed to bear the fruit of love. So love each other, friends. In this season of overwhelming sin and grief, I am convinced that nothing else matters if we cannot get that right. And if we do get that right, not even the gates of hell or how we might feel hell here on earth now will not be able to stand in our way. In the name of God, our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen.